Have you ever walked into the wrong room and stumbled upon a love story waiting to be rewritten? When this billionaire CEO accidentally opened that cruise ship door, would you believe the universe had arranged for him to find not just his long-lost love, but two identical little boys with eyes that mirrored his own? What would you do if fate handed you a second chance at forever in the most unexpected way? Alexander Reed straightened his custom-tailored jacket as he strode down the corridor of the luxury cruise liner, the Celestial Odyssey. At 42, he commanded every room he entered, a skill that had served him well as the CEO of Reed Enterprises, a technology empire he'd built from scratch. His piercing blue eyes, perpetually analyzing, scanned the elegant hallway. Even on this forced vacation, his mind never stopped calculating, planning, conquering. "Mr. Reed, I strongly suggest you try to enjoy yourself." His executive assistant's parting words echoed in his memory. "The board insisted on this break for your health. 3 weeks of relaxation won't kill you." Alexander scoffed. Relaxation was for people who didn't have empires to run, competitors to crush, innovations to launch. His divorce from Vanessa had been finalized 6 months ago, a clinical separation of assets that had taken longer to complete than their actual marriage had to fall apart. No children, thankfully, just the division of properties and investments, handled by lawyers while Alexander focused on the company's European expansion. The ship lurched suddenly, and Alexander stumbled slightly, his shoulder brushing against the wall. He frowned at the indignity of it. He wasn't built for leisure, for idleness. Even his presence on this cruise was a compromise, a concession to the board after his hospitalization for exhaustion 2 months ago. 3 weeks of complete disconnection, Dr. Harmon had prescribed, the traitor. "Your blood pressure is concerning, Alexander. You're headed for a stroke if you continue at this pace." Alexander adjusted his watch, the Swiss timepiece worth more than what most of the staff on this ship earned in a year. He checked his phone again, frustrated by the weak signal. His satellite phone would work better, but he'd promised to use it only for emergencies. He'd already broken that promise twice today, calling to check on the Singapore deal. The Celestial Odyssey was the most exclusive cruise ship in the world, catering to billionaires and celebrities who demanded privacy and luxury in equal measure. Alexander had booked the Poseidon Suite, naturally, the most expensive accommodation on the vessel. Nothing but the best, always. It was a principle that had guided his life since childhood, when he'd worn second-hand clothes and endured the taunts of wealthier classmates. Alexander approached what he thought was his suite, distracted by an email notification that had somehow broken through the spotty coverage. The message preview showed it was from James, his CFO, about the quarterly projections. Alexander's fingers itched to open it, to dive back into the world he understood, the world he controlled. He swiped his keycard absent-mindedly, pushing the door open without looking up from his phone. The familiar scent of his preferred sandalwood room fragrance was absent, replaced by something lighter, floral. Still distracted, Alexander took several steps into the room before realizing his error. This wasn't his suite. Alexander looked up from his phone, an apology forming on his lips, and froze. Sitting on the floor, building an elaborate tower of wooden blocks, were two identical boys, perhaps 5 years old. Dark hair, serious expressions of concentration, miniature button-down shirts that mirrored Alexander's own preference for formal wear. The boys looked up simultaneously, with eyes that Alexander had seen countless times in the mirror, brilliant blue, intelligent, assessing. But it wasn't the boys who had turned Alexander's blood to ice. It was the woman kneeling beside them, helping with the tower. A woman he would have recognized anywhere, despite the 6 years that had passed. Sophia Chen. The only woman who had ever made Alexander Reed consider changing his life plans. The only woman who had walked away from him. "Higher, Mama," one of the twins urged, his voice bright with excitement. "Careful, Ethan," Sophia cautioned, her voice exactly as Alexander remembered it. "We don't want it to—" She looked up then, perhaps sensing another presence in the room. Her dark eyes widened in shock, lips parting slightly. The wooden block in her hand fell to the carpet with a muted thud. "Alexander?" she whispered, as if saying his name might make him disappear. The other twin turned, studying Alexander with an unsettling intensity. "Who's that, Mama?" Alexander couldn't move, couldn't speak. His analytical mind, the brain that had engineered billion-dollar deals and outmaneuvered corporate rivals, was short-circuiting. Connections he didn't want to make were forming anyway, conclusions assembling themselves despite his desperate attempt to reject them. The twins, their age, their eyes, his eyes. Alexander finally managed, his voice unfamiliar to his own ears. "Wrong room." He started to back away, but his legs felt wooden, uncooperative. Sophia stood quickly, smoothing down her sundress. "Boys, stay here and keep building. I need to speak with this gentleman for a moment." She approached Alexander with the caution one might use with a wild animal. Her expression was a complex mixture of emotions, shock, certainly, but also fear, resignation, and something like defiance. "You should come in," she said quietly, "and close the door." "I should go," Alexander replied automatically, business instincts taking over. Retreat, regroup, reassess. Never negotiate from a position of surprise. "Alexander," Sophia said, her voice firmer now. "Please. It's been 6 years. I think we can manage a conversation." Behind her, the twins had resumed their building, but Alexander caught them stealing curious glances in his direction. His heart was pounding in a way it hadn't since his hospitalization, a thundering in his ears that seemed to be spelling out a truth he wasn't ready to face. "Are they?" he began, then stopped, unable to complete the question. Sophia's eyes never left his. "Yes," she answered simply, addressing the unfinished question. "They're yours. Ethan and Noah are your sons." Alexander Reed, the man who controlled a global empire worth billions, who made decisions affecting thousands of employees daily, who had never been truly blindsided in his entire adult life, felt the floor tilt beneath him. He reached for the wall to steady himself, his phone slipping from his grasp and landing on the plush carpet. One of the twins, Noah or Ethan, Alexander didn't know which, pointed at the fallen phone. "Mama, his phone fell." "I see that, sweetheart," Sophia replied, her eyes still locked with Alexander's. "Why don't you bring it to him?" The boy approached cautiously, picking up the phone and extending it toward Alexander. As their fingers brushed during the exchange, Alexander felt an electric current of recognition, of connection, that shook him to his core. "Thank you," he managed to say. The boy nodded solemnly. "You're welcome. I'm Noah. That's my brother Ethan. He's 7 minutes older, but I'm taller by half an inch." Alexander found himself seated on an elegant sofa in the suite's living area, a glass of water in his hand that he didn't remember accepting. Sophia sat across from him in an armchair, her posture straight, defensive. The twins had been gently directed to their bedroom with tablets and headphones, a strategic retreat that Alexander recognized from his own corporate playbook. "How?" was all he managed to say after the silence had stretched uncomfortably between them. "I think you know how, Alexander," Sophia replied, a hint of her old sharpness breaking through her composed exterior. "The biological mechanics haven't changed in the last 6 years. That's not what I—" He stopped, ran a hand through his meticulously styled dark hair. "You were on birth control. You told me you were." "I was," she confirmed. "But nothing is 100% effective. I found out 3 weeks after you ended things." The words landed like accusations, though her tone remained even. Alexander's mind raced back to their final conversation in the penthouse he'd just purchased as a symbol of his ascension in the business world. Sophia had wanted more commitment. He'd been focused on closing the Thompson merger. She'd talked about building a life together. He'd countered with reasons why it wasn't the right time. When she'd asked if he ever saw children in their future, His dismissive laugh had been answer enough. "You never told me," he said, unable to keep the accusation from his voice. "I tried," Sophia countered, leaning forward slightly. "I called your office for weeks. Your assistant said you were unavailable. I emailed. No response. I even came to your building, but security wouldn't let me up." She paused, the memory clearly still raw. "Then I saw the announcement of your engagement to Vanessa Miller in the business section. That made things pretty clear." Alexander winced. His marriage to Vanessa, the daughter of his biggest investor at the time, had been more merger than romance, a fact both had acknowledged privately, even while smiling for the cameras. "You should have tried harder," he insisted, falling back on the offensive stance that had served him well in boardrooms. "These are my children, Sophia. I had a right to know." "Your children?" Sophia's calm facade cracked slightly, her eyes flashing. "The children you explicitly told me you never wanted? The children I've raised alone for 5 years while building my career? Those children?" She took a deliberate breath, regaining her composure. Alexander was reminded of what had first attracted him to Sophia, her ability to match his intensity, to stand her ground when everyone else in his orbit scrambled to agree with him. "I did what I thought was best for my sons," she continued. "You made your priorities very clear. Your empire came first. Everything and everyone else was secondary." "That doesn't give you the right to keep them from me," Alexander countered, though a small voice in his head acknowledged the truth in her words. "I'm not having this argument again," Sophia said, standing abruptly. "We're on this cruise for the boys. It's their first real vacation, and I won't have it ruined by rehashing the past." "Again? We've never had this argument before," Alexander pointed out, standing as well, unwilling to let her have the height advantage. "Not with you," she clarified, "but I've had it with myself, countless times over the years, wondering if I made the right choice, wondering if you had a right to know, even if you didn't want to be involved." Alexander's retort died on his lips as the door to the bedroom opened and one of the twins, Ethan, he thought, peeked out. "Mama? We're hungry." Sophia's expression softened immediately. "Dinner will be soon, sweetheart. Why don't you and Noah wash up?" "Can he come too?" Ethan asked, pointing at Alexander. Alexander and Sophia exchanged a glance laden with unspoken complications. "That's up to Mr. Reed," Sophia replied carefully. "He might have other plans." The use of his formal name stung Alexander in a way he hadn't expected. To this child, his child, he was a stranger. Mr. Reed, not dad or father or even Alexander. "Actually," he found himself saying, "I'd like that, if it's all right with your mother." Sophia studied him, clearly weighing potential scenarios and outcomes, another trait they shared. Finally, she nodded. "All right. Dinner is at 6 in the Poseidon dining room." "I know it," Alexander said. "My suite is nearby." He hesitated, then added, "The Poseidon suite." "Of course it is," Sophia murmured almost to herself. To Ethan, she said, "Go help your brother get ready, please." When the boy had disappeared back into the bedroom, Sophia turned to Alexander, her expression serious. "Listen to me carefully. I won't stop you from getting to know them. They've asked about their father, and I've never lied. I've told them you're a busy, important businessman who lives far away. But if you're going to be in their lives even just for this cruise, you need to be careful. They're sensitive, intelligent boys. If you're not serious about this, walk away now." "I don't walk away from responsibilities," Alexander stated firmly. "This isn't a corporate obligation you can delegate or solve with money," Sophia fired back. "These are children, your children, with feelings and needs and questions." "I'm aware of that," Alexander said, though in truth he was still processing the enormity of the situation. "I want to get to know them." "And then what?" Sophia challenged. "We dock in 2 weeks, and you go back to your empire while they try to understand why their father disappeared again?" "I haven't thought that far ahead," Alexander admitted, the words unfamiliar and uncomfortable. He always thought ahead. It was how he'd built his success. "Well, start thinking," Sophia advised, her tone softening slightly. "Because they will get attached. And unlike your board members or your ex-wife, they can't protect themselves with legal teams and prenuptial agreements." The barb found its mark. Alexander nodded stiffly. "I understand. 6 o'clock then." He moved toward the door, then paused. They're remarkable, Sophia. You've done well with them." Something flickered across her face. Surprise, perhaps, or the ghost of an old affection. "They are remarkable," she agreed, "and I've done my best." She hesitated, then added, "Noah has your head for numbers. Ethan has your stubbornness." Alexander felt an unexpected warmth at this information, these small connections to the boys already forming. "And they both have your artistic talent," he observed, nodding toward a set of intricate drawings pinned to the wall. "Yes," Sophia acknowledged with a small smile. "Though they use it to design elaborate superhero vehicles rather than the fine art I had hoped for." The moment of shared pride hung between them, a fragile bridge across the chasm of years and secrets. "I'll see you at dinner," Alexander said finally, retreating toward the door. As he stepped into the hallway, he heard the excited voices of the twins from deeper in the suite, and for the first time in years, perhaps for the first time ever, his mind was entirely disconnected from Reed Enterprises. Instead, it was filled with blue eyes that mirrored his own, with questions about favorite foods and activities, with calculations of child support and educational trust funds, with the disorienting realization that while he had been building his empire, an entirely different legacy had been growing without his knowledge. Alexander Reed had entered the wrong room and discovered the existence of his sons. Now everything else, the quarterly projections, the Singapore deal, even the forced vacation, seemed suddenly, bewilderingly insignificant. Alexander returned to his suite in a daze, his mind replaying the encounter on an endless loop. He barely registered the opulent surroundings of the Poseidon suite, the panoramic windows overlooking the ocean, the private deck with its infinity pool, the priceless artwork adorning the walls. Instead, he sank onto the edge of his bed, staring at his reflection in the mirror across the room. 2 sons. He had 2 sons. The face that stared back at him was familiar yet strange. The same face that had graced magazine covers and business publications, now haunted by the knowledge of what he had missed. 5 years of first steps, first words, birthdays, illnesses, milestones. 5 years that he could never reclaim. Alexander closed his eyes, and memories of Sophia flooded back with unexpected clarity. Their first meeting had been at a charity gala 6 years ago. He had attended only because a potential investor would be there. Sophia, an up-and-coming artist whose work was being auctioned, had caught his attention immediately, not just for her beauty, but for the quiet confidence with which she navigated the room of wealthy patrons. "Not enjoying the party?" she had asked, approaching him as he checked his email in a corner. Alexander had looked up, prepared to dismiss her with his usual efficiency, but something in her perceptive gaze had made him pause. "These events are business, not pleasure," he'd replied. "And there's no room for both?" she'd challenged, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. That night had been the first time in years that Alexander had set aside his phone for an entire evening. Sophia had been unlike anyone in his usual orbit, creative where he was analytical, spontaneous where he was calculated, unwilling to be impressed by his wealth or status. She had seen through the armor of success to the man beneath, and for a while, Alexander had allowed himself to be that man. Their relationship had been intense, consuming. Weekends in Paris, impromptu dinners at hidden restaurants Sophia discovered, lazy mornings in his penthouse discussing everything from art to philosophy to business strategy. Sophia had challenged him, inspired him, occasionally infuriated him. For 14 months, Alexander had experienced a different kind of life, a counterbalance to the relentless pursuit of success that had driven him since college. But then had come the Thompson merger, the opportunity to expand Reed Enterprises into Asia. Weeks of 18-hour workdays, of cancelled plans and postponed weekends. Sophia had been understanding at first, then increasingly frustrated. Their arguments had grown more frequent, centered around the same fundamental issue: Alexander's inability to separate himself from his work, to prioritize their relationship. "I'm building something important," he had told her during one particularly heated exchange. "Something that will last." "And what about us?" Sophia had asked. "Isn't this important too? Isn't this something worth building?" The final breaking point had come when Sophia broached the subject of their future, of marriage, of children, of a life beyond Alexander's next acquisition or product launch. He had dismissed the idea, explaining that children weren't part of his plan, that he couldn't divide his focus. "I need someone who understands that Reed Enterprises comes first," he had told her. "I thought you were that person." Sophia's expression had shifted then, from hurt to a kind of clarity. "I understand perfectly," she had said quietly, "and I deserve more than being an afterthought in someone else's story." She had walked out, and Alexander had let her go, telling himself it was for the best, that she would have become a distraction from his true purpose. He had channeled his conflicted emotions into work, securing the Thompson merger and announcing his strategic engagement to Vanessa Miller within months. Now, sitting in his suite with the knowledge of his twin sons just a few doors away, Alexander felt the magnitude of what his choices had cost him. Not just Sophia, he had rationalized that loss long ago, but the opportunity to know his own children from the beginning. His phone rang, shattering the reverie. James, his CFO, calling about the Singapore deal, no doubt. Alexander stared at the device as if it were a foreign object. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, he silenced his phone without answering, placing it face down on the nightstand. Instead, he moved to his laptop, opening a search engine. He hesitated, then typed "Sophia Chen Artist" into the search bar. The results populated immediately, showing a career that had flourished in the years since their parting. Gallery showings in New York, London, Hong Kong. Critical acclaim for her mixed media installations exploring themes of identity and transformation. A recent appointment as the creative director for an international arts foundation. She had thrived without him, built her own success while simultaneously raising their children. The knowledge stirred a complex mixture of pride, regret, and something like shame in Alexander's chest. Further searching revealed no public acknowledgement of the twins or their paternity. Sophia had kept that part of her life private, shielded from the media attention that had increasingly surrounded her work. Alexander found himself grateful for this discretion, even as he questioned whether it had been for the boys' protection or to keep them from him. A glance at his watch jolted him back to the present. It was already 5:30. He had 30 minutes to prepare for dinner with the family he hadn't known existed until 2 hours ago. Alexander Reed, who typically spent hours preparing for important meetings, analyzing backgrounds and planning negotiation strategies, now found himself at a complete loss. What did 5-year-old boys talk about? What did they like to eat? Would they ask why he hadn't been in their lives? Would they even care who he was? Alexander showered and changed methodically, his body operating on autopilot while his mind continued to grapple with the implications of the day's discovery. He selected a more casual outfit than his usual business attire, dark jeans and a navy cashmere sweater, a conscious decision to appear more approachable. As he prepared to leave his suite, Alexander caught himself checking his appearance with an uncharacteristic nervousness. He was a man accustomed to commanding rooms, closing billion-dollar deals, addressing shareholders. Yet the prospect of dinner with 2 5-year-old boys and their mother, his sons and his ex-girlfriend, filled him with an unfamiliar anxiety. He thought of his own father, a distant, demanding figure whose approval had always seemed just out of reach. The countless piano recitals and science fairs Alexander had participated in, scanning the audience for a face that rarely appeared. The successes that went unacknowledged, the failures that were meticulously catalogued and revisited. The cold, pragmatic advice that had shaped Alexander's understanding of the world. Sentiment is a luxury for those who can afford to be soft. Success requires sacrifice. Alexander had internalized those lessons, built his life around them. He had sacrificed personal connections for professional achievements, convinced that this was the path to a meaningful legacy. Now, with the revelation of Ethan and Noah, he was forced to confront the possibility that he had been perpetuating the very patterns he had resented in his own upbringing. "Not anymore," Alexander said aloud to his reflection, his voice firm with new resolve. He didn't yet know what his relationship with his sons would look like, how he would balance this unexpected responsibility with the demands of his company. But he knew, with a certainty that surprised him, that he would not be the absent father that his own had been. With that decision strengthening his steps, Alexander left his suite and walked toward the Poseidon dining room, toward a dinner that felt more consequential than any business meeting he had ever attended. The Poseidon dining room epitomized luxury, with its crystal chandeliers, panoramic ocean views, and tables spaced far enough apart to ensure privacy for the ship's elite clientele. Alexander arrived precisely at 6, habitually punctual. He spotted Sophia and the twins immediately, seated at a table near the windows. Sophia wore a simple black dress that Alexander recognized as her style, elegant without ostentation, while the boys had been dressed in matching blue button-down shirts and khaki pants. He approached with measured steps, noting how Sophia tensed slightly upon seeing him, her hand reflexively moving to smooth Noah's hair. The gesture was protective, maternal in a way that still seemed surreal to Alexander. Sophia as a mother, as the mother of his children. "Sorry we started without ordering drinks," Sophia said as he reached the table. The boys were getting restless. "No apology necessary," Alexander replied, taking the empty seat beside Ethan and across from Noah. "I appreciate you allowing me to join you." An awkward silence settled over the table. Alexander, who prided himself on his ability to navigate any social situation with ease, found himself struggling to find the right words. The twins stared at him with undisguised curiosity. "You're really tall," Noah observed finally, breaking the tension. Alexander smiled, grateful for the opening. "I am quite tall. Do you like being tall, Noah?" The boy nodded solemnly. "Being tall means I can reach things and see over people's heads at the aquarium." "Very practical advantages," Alexander agreed, matching the child's serious tone. "Mama says we'll probably be tall like you when we grow up," Ethan chimed in, "because of genetics." Alexander glanced at Sophia, surprised by this casual acknowledgement of their connection. She met his gaze steadily, a silent communication passing between them. She hadn't hidden his existence from the boys, merely his identity. "Your mother is right about genetics," Alexander said. "They determine many of our physical traits." "Like our eyes," Noah added, pointing to his own blue irises. "Mama says we have your eyes, and your brain for numbers." The direct reference to his paternity caught Alexander off guard. He looked questioningly at Sophia. "I told you I've never lied to them," she said quietly. "They know their father is a businessman named Alexander who's very good with numbers and strategy." "We just didn't know you were on the boat," Ethan explained, reaching for his water glass with careful concentration. "Mama said we might meet you someday, but not on vacation." Alexander felt a tightness in his chest, a physical manifestation of emotions he rarely allowed himself to acknowledge. These children, his sons, spoke of him with such matter-of-fact acceptance, as if his absence from their lives was simply a logistical reality rather than a profound failure on his part. "Well, I'm very glad we've met now," he managed to say, his voice rougher than usual. A server approached then, providing a welcome interruption. The twins ordered with the confidence of children accustomed to fine dining, a detail that Alexander filed away, evidence of the life Sophia had provided for them. He noted that Noah requested his pasta with the sauce on the side, while Ethan asked detailed questions about the fish option before making his selection. Their distinct personalities emerged even in these small choices. "They're very articulate for their age," Alexander observed after the server departed. "They've always been verbal," Sophia replied, a hint of pride warming her voice. "They were speaking in full sentences before they were 2. The preschool suggested we consider early advancement, but I wanted them to develop socially with peers their own age." "A wise decision," Alexander agreed, remembering his own accelerated education, academically enriching but socially isolating. "Do you have other kids?" Ethan asked suddenly, fixing Alexander with a direct gaze that was disconcertingly familiar. "No," Alexander answered, caught off guard by the question. "I don't." "Are you married?" Noah followed up, equally direct. "Noah," Sophia cautioned gently, "remember our discussion about personal questions." "It's all right," Alexander assured her, then addressed the boys. "I was married, but I'm not anymore. We decided we weren't right for each other." "Like you and Mama?" Ethan asked innocently. The question landed like a physical blow. Alexander glanced at Sophia, whose expression remained carefully neutral, though he detected a slight tightening around her eyes. "That was different," Alexander said carefully. "Your mother and I were never married." "But you didn't want to be together anymore," Noah pressed, demonstrating a persistence that Alexander recognized as his own. "Sometimes," Sophia interjected, "grown-ups have different paths they need to follow, different dreams and goals. Like how I want to be an astronaut and Ethan wants to be a marine biologist," Noah asked. "Something like that," Sophia agreed with a gentle smile. "Except grown-up goals can sometimes make it hard to be together, even when people care about each other." Alexander was struck by the generosity of her explanation, the absence of blame or bitterness that he would have been entitled to express. She was protecting the boy's perception of him, despite everything. "Your mother is right," he said, meeting Sophia's gaze with newfound respect. "Sometimes adults make choices that seem right at the time, but later they might wish they had chosen differently." Something shifted in Sophia's expression. Surprise, perhaps, at this indirect acknowledgement of regret. Before she could respond, their meals arrived, temporarily diverting the twins' attention. As they ate, the conversation flowed more naturally. Alexander found himself genuinely interested in the boys' anecdotes about school, their detailed explanation of a science project involving growing crystals, their enthusiastic review of the ship's children's club they had visited that morning. He noted with fascination how Noah approached his meal methodically, eating one food at a time, while Ethan sampled everything in alternating bites, small windows into their developing personalities. "Do you want to see our special trick?" Ethan asked as they finished their entrees. "I'd like that very much," Alexander replied, his usual formality softening in the face of childish enthusiasm. The twins exchanged a glance, then simultaneously took a sip of water, placed their glasses down with precision, and folded their hands on the table in perfect synchronization. "Impressive," Alexander acknowledged with a smile. "Do you practice that?" "No," Noah answered, looking puzzled by the question. "We just do it. Mama says it's a twin thing." "It's called mirroring behavior," Sophia explained. "They don't even realize they're doing it most of the time. We can feel what the other one is thinking," Ethan added seriously, "like superheroes." "But not all the time," Noah clarified. "Only sometimes, and only for important things." "That's a remarkable connection," Alexander said, genuinely fascinated by this glimpse into twin psychology. As dessert arrived, chocolate lava cake that the boys attacked with undisguised delight, Alexander found himself increasingly comfortable in their presence. The initial shock and disorientation were giving way to a different feeling, one he struggled to identify until he realized with some surprise that it was contentment. Here, away from the demands of his company, the pressure of shareholders and board members, he was experiencing a simple pleasure in the company of these children. His children. The realization was both comforting and terrifying. Comforting because it felt natural, right? In a way few things in his carefully constructed life ever had. Terrifying because it challenged everything he had believed about himself, about his priorities and needs. "Mr. Alexander," Noah said, interrupting his thoughts, "do you want to come see the magic show with us tomorrow? It's at the Atlantis Theater at 2 o'clock. Alexander looked to Sophia, seeking permission. She hesitated, then nodded slightly. "I would be honored," he told Noah solemnly, matching the boy's serious demeanor. "And you can call me Alexander if you'd like, without the Mr." "Okay, Alexander," Noah replied, testing the name. "Mama says that's your whole name. Don't you have a last name too?" "I do," Alexander confirmed. "It's Reed." "Reed," Ethan repeated thoughtfully. "Our last name is Chen, like Mama's." Alexander felt the weight of this simple statement, the implicit question it contained. He looked at Sophia, whose expression was carefully guarded. "Yes," he said finally, returning his attention to Ethan. "That's your mother's family name, and it's a good, strong name." After dinner, Alexander walked Sophia and the twins back to their suite, maintaining a careful distance as they moved through the ship's elegant corridors. The boys raced ahead, their energy seemingly undiminished by the late hour, while Sophia occasionally called out gentle reminders to slow down or watch for other passengers. "They're extraordinary," Alexander said quietly, his gaze following the twins as they examined a model ship displayed in a glass case. "They are," Sophia agreed, her voice softening with maternal pride. "Even when they're driving me crazy, they're still the most amazing people I've ever known." "You've done a remarkable job with them," Alexander acknowledged, the compliment genuine despite the competing emotions churning within him. "They're intelligent, well-mannered, curious. They're also stubborn, argumentative, and too clever for their own good sometimes," Sophia added with a smile. "I wonder where they get that from." The gentle teasing caught Alexander by surprise, a flicker of their old dynamic emerging through the layers of tension and unresolved history. "Nature versus nurture," he replied, returning her smile tentatively. "Though in this case, I suspect they're doubly doomed on the stubborn front." They walked in silence for a moment, watching as the twins pressed their faces against the glass of a window, pointing excitedly at the moonlight reflecting off the ocean waves. "I should have told you," Sophia said finally, her voice so low that Alexander had to lean closer to hear her. "I've questioned that decision 1,000 times over the years. But after you didn't respond to my attempts to contact you, after I saw the announcement of your engagement, I understand why you made that choice." Alexander interrupted, surprising himself with the admission. I wouldn't have been receptive then." It was as close to an apology as his pride would allow, but Sophia seemed to recognize it for what it was. She nodded slightly, acknowledging the unspoken concession. "What happens now?" she asked, the question hanging between them as heavily as the unsaid parts of their history. Before Alexander could respond, they reached the suite. Noah and Ethan were already at the door, arguing good-naturedly about whose turn it was to use the key card. "I'll take the magic show tomorrow," Alexander said finally, "and then we'll see." It wasn't much of an answer, but it was honest. He didn't know what came next, how to navigate this unfamiliar territory where strategic planning and corporate tactics offered no guidance. "Fair enough," Sophia conceded. 2 o'clock, Atlantis Theater. The boys will be looking forward to it." The twins insisted on saying goodnight to Alexander with solemn handshakes, a formality that struck him as both amusing and oddly touching. As he walked back to his own suite, Alexander found his mind not on the Singapore deal or quarterly projections, but on the small, warm hands that had grasped his with such innocent trust. The next morning, Alexander woke early, his body conditioned to maximize productive hours. He checked his phone automatically, noting the dozens of emails and messages that had accumulated overnight. For once, they failed to command his immediate attention. Instead, he found himself drawn to the private deck of his suite, watching the sunrise over the endless horizon of ocean. The vastness before him seemed to mirror the expansiveness of his thoughts, the recalibration of perspective that had begun the moment he'd walked into the wrong suite. Alexander Reed, who had built his life around control and certainty, now found himself in uncharted waters, navigating by instinct rather than by the carefully plotted course he typically favored. After breakfast, he surprised himself by visiting the ship's gift shop, a place he would normally delegate an assistant to visit if necessary. He moved through the aisles with purposeful steps, selecting 2 identical plush dolphins, a nod to Ethan's interest in marine biology, and a set of star charts that might appeal to Noah's astronaut aspirations. The purchases felt simultaneously insignificant and monumental, his first tangible acknowledgement of fatherhood. At precisely 1:45, Alexander arrived at the Atlantis Theater. He spotted Sophia and the twins in the front row, the boys bouncing with excitement. Noah noticed him first, waving enthusiastically. "Alexander, we saved you a seat," he called, patting the empty spot beside him. Heads turned at the familiar name, several passengers recognizing the billionaire CEO whose face occasionally appeared in business publications and Sunday supplements. Alexander ignored the curious glances, focusing instead on the genuine welcome in his son's expression. "Thank you for saving me a seat," he said as he joined them, presenting each boy with one of the wrapped packages. "I thought you might enjoy these." The twins tore into the gifts with unrestrained enthusiasm, their delight at the thoughtful selections evident in their exclamations. "A real star chart," Noah marveled, carefully unfolding the detailed map of constellations. "Now I can find Orion's belt without Mama's help." "The dolphin is so soft," Ethan announced, running his fingers over the plush toy. "I'm naming him Poseidon, after our dining room." "A very appropriate name," Alexander agreed, oddly touched by the connection to their shared dinner. Sophia observed the interaction with a guarded expression that softened when she met Alexander's questioning gaze. She nodded slightly, a silent acknowledgement of the appropriate nature of the gifts. The magic show was designed for children but executed with enough sophistication to entertain the adults as well. Alexander found himself genuinely amused by the performers' antics, particularly the way the twins gasped and applauded at each illusion, their wonder untempered by adult skepticism. "How did he do that?" Ethan whispered urgently after a particularly impressive disappearing act. "It's a secret," Alexander replied. "Magicians never reveal their methods." "But you know, don't you?" Noah pressed, turning those familiar blue eyes on him. "You know how it works." Alexander hesitated, torn between honesty and the preservation of childish wonder. "I have some theories," he admitted finally, "but sometimes it's more fun not to know all the answers." It was a sentiment entirely at odds with his usual approach to life, where information and understanding were paramount. Yet here, watching his sons' faces light up with the pure joy of mystery, Alexander found himself appreciating the value of unanswered questions. After the show, they explored the ship's upper deck, where a miniature golf course had been set up. The twins proved to be surprisingly competent players for their age, though their approach to the game revealed their distinct personalities. Noah carefully calculated angles and force, while Ethan employed a more intuitive trial-and-error method. "I've never played before," Alexander confessed when it was his turn, the admission of inexperience unusual for a man who prided himself on capability in all endeavors. "I'll show you," Noah offered earnestly. "You have to hold the club like this, and then you hit the ball, but not too hard." Alexander allowed himself to be instructed by his 5-year-old son, aware of Sophia watching with an expression he couldn't quite interpret. When his shot went wide, missing the hole by a significant margin, the twins' peals of laughter held no judgment, only shared amusement at the novelty of an adult struggling with something they found relatively simple. As the afternoon progressed, Alexander found himself relaxing into the novel experience of simply being present, of engaging without agenda or outcome in mind. He noted with fascination the subtle differences between the twins that became more apparent with extended interaction. Noah's analytical approach to problems, Ethan's intuitive leaps, Noah's quiet intensity, Ethan's expressive enthusiasm, the way Noah meticulously planned before acting, while Ethan plunged ahead with confident spontaneity. Most striking was the realization that he recognized parts of himself in both boys, not just in their physical appearance but in their mannerisms and thought processes. Yet there were qualities he saw in them that were foreign to his nature: openness, uninhibited joy, a natural empathy, traits he suspected they had inherited from Sophia. "Ice cream," Ethan declared as they finished the final hole of mini-golf. "We always get ice cream after activities. It's tradition." "Is it indeed?" Alexander asked, glancing at Sophia with raised eyebrows. "A very recent tradition they seem to have established on this cruise," she clarified with a wry smile. "But yes, I suppose ice cream would be acceptable." At the ship's ice cream parlor, Alexander watched as the twins deliberated over flavors with the seriousness of negotiators at a peace treaty. Noah eventually selected vanilla with chocolate sauce, because it's a classic combination that works reliably, while Ethan chose a vibrant blue concoction with rainbow sprinkles, because it looks like the ocean with colorful fish. "And for you, sir?" the server asked Alexander. "I don't typically," he began, then caught the twins watching him expectantly. "Actually, I'll try the chocolate almond, please." As they sat at a small table enjoying their treats, Alexander was struck by the ordinary extraordinariness of the moment. He, who regularly dined at Michelin-starred restaurants and whose personal chef prepared meals to exacting specifications, was finding unexpected pleasure in a simple ice cream cone, surrounded by the cheerful chaos of families on vacation. "You have ice cream on your nose," Noah informed him seriously. Alexander reached for a napkin, but Ethan was quicker, handing him one with chocolate-smeared fingers. "Here you go. Mama always says cleanliness is next to godliness, but fun is messy sometimes." "A wise perspective," Alexander agreed, wiping his nose and accepting the sticky napkin with a gravity that matched the situation's apparent importance to the boys. As the afternoon wore on, Alexander found himself increasingly attuned to the rhythms of the twins' interactions, to the subtle cues that indicated fatigue or overstimulation. When Noah began to rub his eyes and Ethan's chatter became slightly frenetic, he recognized the signs before Sophia had to intervene. "Perhaps it's time for a rest before dinner," he suggested, catching Sophia's surprised but appreciative glance. "No rest!" Ethan protested immediately. "We're not babies." "Of course not," Alexander agreed smoothly, "but even non-babies need to recharge their energy, just like my phone needs to be plugged in regularly or it won't function optimally." The technological analogy seemed to resonate with the boys, who reluctantly agreed to return to their suite for what Sophia tactfully reframed as quiet time, rather than a nap. "You're a quick study," she remarked as they walked back, the twins a few steps ahead. "I observe and adapt," Alexander replied. "It's a necessary skill in business." "And apparently in parenting?" Sophia added, her tone softening the potential edge of the comment. That evening, after the twins had gone to bed, Sophia invited Alexander to stay for a glass of wine on the suite's private balcony. The night air was cool and fresh, carrying the gentle sound of waves breaking against the ship's hull. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the awkwardness of their earlier encounters gradually giving way to a cautious familiarity. "I tried to tell you," Sophia said finally, her fingers tracing the rim of her wine glass, "about the pregnancy." Alexander nodded, encouraging her to continue. When I found out, I was terrified, she admitted. We had just broken up. I was heartbroken, angry, confused, but I knew I wanted to keep them, even before I knew there were two of them. She smiled faintly at the memory. The doctor's face when she saw the second heartbeat. I think I started laughing and crying at the same time. Twins don't run in my family, so it must be from your side. My father was a twin, Alexander confirmed, though they weren't identical. I called your office the day after that appointment, Sophia continued. Your assistant said you were in meetings all day. I left my number, asked her to have you call me back. Nothing. I tried again the next day, and the next. Alexander winced, remembering the period she described. The Thompson merger had consumed him entirely. He had delegated all personal calls to his assistant with strict instructions to minimize interruptions. After 2 weeks, I emailed you, Sophia went on. A simple message. We need to talk about something important. Please call me. No response. I thought maybe you were still angry about our breakup, that you were deliberately ignoring me. I wasn't, Alexander said quietly. I never saw the messages. My assistant at the time, Diane, she was instructed to filter everything that wasn't directly related to the merger. I figured it was something like that, Sophia acknowledged. But at the time it felt like rejection. And then I saw the announcement of your engagement just a month after we'd broken up. That hurt, more than I expected. Alexander remembered the engagement, arranged with the cool pragmatism of a business transaction. Vanessa had understood the arrangement. Her family's investment firm held significant stakes in companies Alexander wanted to acquire. The marriage had been a strategic alliance, dissolving as clinically as it had formed when its usefulness had ended. I decided then that you had moved on completely, Sophia continued, that you wouldn't want the complication of children from a previous relationship. I told myself I was protecting the babies by not forcing my way into your life. She took a sip of wine, her gaze distant. When they were born, it was overwhelming, beautiful and terrifying and exhausting. My mother came to help for the first few months, but it was still the hardest thing I've ever done. There were nights I was so tired I could barely remember my own name. Alexander tried to imagine Sophia alone with newborn twins, tried to picture the sleepless nights and constant demands. The image contrasted sharply with his own life during that period, the expansion of Reed Enterprises, the accolades, the acquisition of his first private jet. My career was just starting to take off when I got pregnant, Sophia added. I had to turn down a major exhibition, postpone commissions. It set me back professionally, but I never regretted it. Not for a second. How did you manage? Alexander asked, genuinely curious. Raising twins while building your career? One day at a time, Sophia replied with a slight shrug. I adapted my studio so they could be with me while I worked. When they were a little older, I found a part-time nanny who was amazing with them. I took smaller commissions that allowed for more flexible schedules. She smiled, a private expression of remembered joy. And they were such good babies, really. Challenging, exhausting, but good. They slept at the same time, ate at the same time. They comforted each other in ways I couldn't always understand. Alexander felt a pang of something like envy, not of Sophia's struggles, but of her intimate knowledge of their son's earliest days, the foundational moments he had missed. When they were about 2, they started asking about their father, Sophia continued. Simple questions at first. Do we have a daddy? Where is he? I decided then that I would never lie to them, but I would keep the explanations age-appropriate. What did you tell them? Alexander asked, his throat unexpectedly tight. That their father was a very smart, very busy man who lived far away. That he built important things and helped people solve problems. As they got older and the questions became more specific, I added more details. That you and I loved each other once, but couldn't make it work. That sometimes grown-ups make choices that seem right at the time, even if they're difficult. Alexander was struck by the generosity of her framing, the absence of bitterness or blame that would have been entirely justified. "You could have painted me as the villain," he observed. "It would have been easy to do." "What would that have accomplished?" Sophia asked. "Besides, they're half you, Alexander. I could see it from the beginning, not just in their eyes or the shape of their faces, but in the way Noah analyzes everything, the way Ethan tackles problems head-on. I wanted them to be proud of where they came from on both sides." The admission humbled him in a way few things ever had. This woman whom he had left behind in his relentless pursuit of success had ensured their children knew the best of him, even in his absence. "I did consider legal action," Sophia admitted after a pause. "When the boys were about 3, I consulted a lawyer about child support, about establishing paternity officially. But the lawyer warned me that someone of your resources and profile might fight for custody, and the thought of a protracted legal battle that might hurt the boys." She shook her head. "I decided it wasn't worth the risk. We were managing. My career was taking off. We had a good life. I told myself that if you ever found out and wanted to be involved, I wouldn't stand in your way. And if you never found out, well, that was the path you'd chosen when you cut off contact." Alexander absorbed this information, trying to imagine how he would have reacted to a paternity claim 3 years ago. He wanted to believe he would have embraced responsibility immediately, but the truth was less certain. The Alexander Reed of 3 years ago had been even more consumed by ambition, even more protective of his reputation and focused on his corporate goals. "And now?" he asked finally. "What do you want now, Sophia?" She considered the question, her expression thoughtful. "I want what's best for Noah and Ethan. I want them to know their father, if that's something you genuinely want too. But I won't allow them to be hurt by half-hearted involvement or sporadic attention when it's convenient for you." Her gaze was direct, unflinching. "They're not a corporate acquisition, Alexander. They're not a project you can delegate or reschedule when something more important comes up. They're children, our children, and they need consistency and commitment." "I understand that," Alexander said, meeting her gaze steadily. "I'm not proposing to swoop in and disrupt the life you've built with them, but I do want to be involved, to know them, to be their father, in whatever capacity you're comfortable with." Sophia studied him, searching for sincerity or reservation in his expression. "And Reed Enterprises? Your board? Your shareholders? How do they fit into this new priority?" It was a fair question, one Alexander had been grappling with since the moment he'd recognized his own eyes looking back at him from the twins' faces. "I don't know yet," he admitted, the uncertainty unfamiliar and uncomfortable. "But I do know that meeting Noah and Ethan has shifted something fundamental. Things that seemed critically important 3 days ago now feel less so." "Parenthood has a way of rearranging priorities," Sophia observed with a small smile. "Even when it comes gradually, with 9 months to prepare. I can only imagine how disorienting it must be to discover it overnight." "Disorienting is one word for it," Alexander agreed. "Transformative might be another." They lapsed into silence again, but it was a different quality of silence now, reflective rather than tense, weighted with possibility rather than regret. "I missed you," Alexander said suddenly, the admission surprising him as much as it seemed to surprise Sophia. "After we ended things, I told myself I was better off focused entirely on work, that relationships were distractions. But the truth is, I missed your perspective, your challenge, your way of seeing the world differently than I do." Sophia's expression softened. "I missed you too. Even when I was angry with you, even when I was struggling with newborns and wondering how my life had become so complicated. I still miss talking with you, debating ideas, sharing discoveries." The acknowledgement hung between them, neither an invitation nor a dismissal, simply a truth acknowledged. "We should get some rest," Sophia said finally, rising from her chair. "The boys have been asking about the rock climbing wall they saw on the activity schedule. I promised we'd check it out tomorrow morning. Would it be all right if I joined you?" Alexander asked, standing as well. "I think they'd like that," Sophia replied. After a slight hesitation, she added, "I would too." At the door to the suite, they paused, the moment weighted with unspoken history and uncertain future. "Thank you," Alexander said simply. "For tonight's conversation, for tomorrow, for everything you've done for Noah and Ethan." Sophia nodded, accepting the gratitude without diminishing its significance. "Good night, Alexander." "Good night, Sophia," he replied, and as he walked back to his own suite, Alexander realized that for the first time in years, perhaps for the first time ever, his mind was entirely at peace, unconcerned with markets or mergers, focused instead on the simple anticipation of tomorrow's adventure with his sons. The following days established a rhythm that would have been unrecognizable to anyone familiar with Alexander Reed's typical schedule. Mornings began with breakfast alongside Sophia and the twins, followed by activities ranging from swimming in the ship's elaborate pools to participating in child-friendly cooking classes. Afternoons often included quiet time, a concession to the boys' need for rest without calling it a nap, during which Alexander would retreat to his suite to handle the most pressing of his business matters, efficiently dispatching decisions and delegating tasks with a new clarity of purpose. Evenings were spent together as a family unit that was both nascent and natural, sharing meals, watching performances, or simply walking the decks as the boys cataloged the different types of boats they spotted on the horizon. After the twins were in bed, Alexander and Sophia would often share a drink on the balcony, gradually rebuilding a connection that had once been severed but never fully broken. On the fifth day, Alexander was teaching the twins to play chess in the ship's library when his satellite phone rang, the device reserved for genuine emergencies. He excused himself to take the call in a quiet corner, aware of Sophia's watchful gaze. "Reed," he answered tersely. "Sir, I apologize for the interruption," his current executive assistant said, her voice tight with tension. "But the Singapore deal is imploding. Li Ming is threatening to walk unless you personally negotiate the final terms. The board is calling an emergency meeting in 3 hours." 6 days ago, this news would have sent Alexander immediately to the ship's helipad, arranging extraction and transport to the nearest airport. Now, he glanced at Noah, who was studying the chessboard with intense concentration, and at Ethan, who was arranging the captured pieces in elaborate formations. "Tell Li Ming I'll call him directly in 1 hour," Alexander instructed, "and inform the board I'll join the meeting remotely. Have the legal team prepare alternative proposals based on scenarios A and C from our contingency planning." "Yes, sir," the assistant replied, clearly relieved. "Shall I arrange transport?" Alexander hesitated only briefly. "No, I'll handle the situation from here." He ended the call and returned to the chess lesson, aware that something fundamental had shifted in his approach. The Singapore deal was still important, a billion-dollar expansion that would secure Reed Enterprises' position in the Asian market for decades, but it no longer commanded his exclusive attention or defined his sense of purpose. Later, after the boys had returned to their suite with Sophia for quiet time, Alexander set up his laptop in his suite and connected to the emergency board meeting. The familiar faces of his executive team appeared on screen, their expressions a mixture of concern and relief at seeing him. "Gentlemen, ladies," Alexander began with his customary authority, "I understand we have a situation with the Singapore acquisition. Let's address it efficiently so we can all return to our respective commitments." For the next hour, he guided the discussion with the strategic acumen that had made him one of the most respected CEOs in the technology sector. He identified weaknesses in Li Ming's negotiating position, proposed creative solutions to the regulatory hurdles, and assigned clear action items to each team member. In summary, he concluded, "We're not walking away from this deal, but neither are we conceding to unreasonable demands. James, you'll implement the revised approach we've outlined. Sarah, your team will prepare the necessary regulatory filings. I'll speak with Li Ming directly after this call to establish the new parameters." There was a brief silence as the board absorbed both his directives and his evident lack of panic at a situation they had deemed critical enough to interrupt his mandated break. "Alexander," the chairman said finally, "we had expected you might want to return immediately to handle this personally. It's unlike you to delegate a negotiation of this magnitude." Alexander smiled slightly, aware of the understatement. He had built his reputation on personal involvement in every significant deal, on being the closer, the strategic mind that competitors both respected and feared. "Times change, Richard," he replied evenly, "as do priorities. The team we've built is more than capable of executing this strategy. I'll remain available for consultation, but I have confidence in their abilities." The call ended with the board visibly reassessing their understanding of their CEO, and Alexander immediately placed the call to Li Ming. The conversation was direct but respectful, a negotiation between equals that ended with a tentative agreement on revised terms. As Alexander closed his laptop, he realized that he had just navigated a potential corporate crisis without the consuming stress that would typically have accompanied such a challenge. The difference, he recognized, was perspective. The Singapore deal was important, but it was no longer everything. He arrived at Sophia's suite precisely at the agreed time, 3:30, when quiet time concluded. The door was opened by Noah, who greeted him with unrestrained enthusiasm. "Alexander, Mama said you had important business things to do. Are they done now?" "They are," Alexander confirmed, allowing himself to be pulled into the suite by his son's insistent hand. "All resolved satisfactorily." Sophia looked up from where she was helping Ethan with a complex Lego construction, her expression questioning. "Everything okay?" she asked, the simple inquiry encompassing both his business concerns and his emotional state. "Better than okay," Alexander replied with a certainty that surprised him. "A situation that would have consumed me a week ago now seems manageable. Important, but not all important." Sophia's smile was small but understanding. "That's called perspective. It comes with recognizing there are things more valuable than quarterly projections." "Indeed," Alexander agreed, his gaze moving between the twins who had returned to their respective activities. Noah reading a book about space, Ethan continuing his Lego creation. The afternoon proceeded with a visit to the ship's science center, where a marine biologist was giving a presentation on ocean ecosystems. Ethan was enthralled, asking detailed questions about the different species of dolphins and their communication methods. Noah, though interested, was more captivated by the scale model of the solar system in the adjacent exhibition. Alexander found himself naturally gravitating toward Noah's interest, engaging his son in a discussion about the relative distances between planets and the concept of light years. Sophia, meanwhile, accompanied Ethan as he peppered the marine biologist with increasingly specific questions about cetacean intelligence. Later, as they walked toward the dining room for dinner, Alexander observed the natural way they had divided parental responsibilities, each gravitating toward the twin whose interests most aligned with their own knowledge and passions. It felt right, balanced, a complementary approach to parenting that played to their individual strengths. "Papa used to design rockets," Noah informed a fellow passenger who had stopped to admire the detailed drawing of a space shuttle the boy was working on while waiting for their table. "Real ones that go to actual space." Alexander froze, the casual designation catching him entirely off guard. He glanced at Sophia, who appeared equally surprised by Noah's use of the term. "Noah," she began carefully, "It's accurate, actually," Alexander interrupted gently. "Before founding Reed Enterprises, I did work briefly with the aerospace division at MIT's research lab, though design is perhaps an overstatement of my role." Noah beamed, clearly pleased that his announcement had been validated rather than corrected. Sophia gave Alexander a look that communicated volumes: gratitude for his graceful handling of the moment, caution about the implications, an acknowledgement of a threshold crossed. Throughout dinner, Alexander noticed both twins occasionally glancing at him with a new awareness, testing the boundaries of this evolving relationship. When Ethan dropped his napkin and automatically said, "Papa, can you get that please?" The designation seemed to settle into place, accepted by all parties as natural despite its newness. After the boys were in bed, Alexander and Sophia sat in their now customary places on the balcony, the night air carrying the faint scent of salt and distant shores. "Noah called me Papa," Alexander said, still processing the significance of the moment. "I heard," Sophia replied. "I wasn't sure how you'd react." "Neither was I," he admitted. "But it felt right. Though I was surprised they moved to that so quickly." Sophia smiled, a hint of her old mischief brightening her eyes. "They've been practicing, actually. I overheard them yesterday, debating whether to call you Dad or Papa or Father. Ethan thought Father sounded too formal, and Noah argued that Dad wasn't special enough since their friends all have dads. They decided Papa had the right balance of respect and affection." Alexander laughed softly, touched by the image of his sons methodically analyzing such a decision. "They really are our children, aren't they? Weighing options, considering implications." With a healthy dose of impulsivity and artistic flair, Sophia added, "Don't forget that part of the equation." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the comfortable kind that had once characterized their relationship in its best moments. "What happens when we dock, Alexander?" Sophia asked finally, voicing the question that had hovered unspoken between them for days. "When you go back to Reed Enterprises and board meetings and global acquisitions?" It was the question he had been contemplating with increasing frequency, examining possible scenarios with the same strategic thoroughness he applied to business decisions. Yet none of the potential answers felt adequate to the complex reality they were navigating. "I don't know exactly," he acknowledged, "but I know I want to be part of their lives, a consistent, present part. Not a distant figure who appears for holidays and sends expensive gifts." "That would require significant changes to your lifestyle," Sophia observed, neither encouraging nor discouraging, simply stating a reality. "Reed Enterprises demands most of your waking hours from what I've read." "It has," Alexander agreed, "but perhaps it doesn't need to continue that way." The statement, once articulated, felt both radical and inevitable. Alexander Reed, whose identity had been synonymous with his company for so long, was contemplating a fundamental realignment of priorities. "You've built an extraordinary team," Sophia said, surprising him with her insight. "I've watched you delegate more this week than you probably have in the last decade. Maybe there's a model where you lead strategically without sacrificing everything else." Alexander nodded slowly, considering the possibility. "It would require restructuring, perhaps bringing in a COO to handle daily operations, freeing me to focus on vision and key relationships. And geographical considerations," Sophia added cautiously. "The boys have school, friends, routines in New York. Their lives are established there. While Reed Enterprises is headquartered in San Francisco," Alexander acknowledged, immediately understanding the implied complication, "with regular travel to Tokyo, London, Singapore." He fell silent, contemplating the logistical and emotional challenges inherent in attempting to reconcile his established life with his newly discovered role as father. The quiet between them was weighted now, no longer comfortable but not quite tense, expectant perhaps of a solution neither had yet identified. "We have time to figure it out," Sophia said finally. "The cruise doesn't end for another 9 days. We don't need to solve everything tonight." Alexander recognized the wisdom in her approach, the patience that had always balanced his drive for immediate resolution. "You're right," he conceded. "One day at a time." As he returned to his suite later that evening, Alexander found himself drawn to the deck, gazing at the vast expanse of stars above the darkened ocean. The perspective was humbling, his concerns, his company, even his considerable achievements rendered small against the backdrop of cosmic scale. The ship's captain's voice over the intercom system woke Alexander at 5:47 a.m., an unusual occurrence that immediately put him on alert. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Mercer speaking. I regret to inform you that we are experiencing some technical difficulties with our navigation system. As a precautionary measure, we ask all passengers to remain in their suites until further notice. There is no immediate cause for concern, and our crew is working diligently to resolve the issue. We will provide updates as the situation develops. Thank you for your cooperation." Alexander was already reaching for his phone, his first thought not of the potential danger but of Sophia and the twins. He dialed her suite number, relieved when she answered immediately. "I was just about to call you," Sophia said, her voice calm but with an undercurrent of tension. "The boys are still asleep, thankfully." "Good," Alexander replied. "It's probably nothing serious, but I'm going to see what I can find out. Stay where you are, and I'll come to you as soon as I have more information." Dressing quickly, Alexander made his way to the purser's office, noting the increased activity among crew members, their typically relaxed demeanor replaced by focused efficiency. He approached the desk with the confidence of someone accustomed to receiving immediate attention. "I need to speak with the captain or his executive officer," Alexander stated, presenting his suite keycard. "Alexander Reed, Poseidon Suite." The purser, a professional woman in her 40s, recognized the name immediately. "Mr. Reed, I understand your concern, but I assure you that Captain Mercer is fully engaged in addressing the current situation. Perhaps I can—" "I'm not here to complain or interfere," Alexander interrupted, his tone measured but authoritative. "I have some experience with integrated navigation systems from my company's work with aerospace applications. I may be able to assist, or at the very least, I'd appreciate an honest assessment of the situation. I have children on board." The mention of his experience, combined with the personal note about his children, shifted the purser's expression from polite deflection to thoughtful consideration. "Wait here, please," she said finally, disappearing through a door marked "Crew Only." Several minutes later, she returned with a tall man in uniform, his 4 stripes identifying him as the ship's executive officer. "Mr. Reed," the officer greeted him with a firm handshake. "I'm Commander Davis, First Officer. The purser mentioned you might have relevant expertise." "Potentially," Alexander confirmed. "What are you dealing with?" Commander Davis hesitated, clearly weighing the protocols against the potential benefit of consulting a passenger with specialized knowledge. "This conversation is confidential," he said finally. "We're experiencing a malfunction in our integrated navigation and propulsion systems. The redundant systems are functioning, but we're unable to maintain our planned course and speed. We've altered course toward the nearest port while our engineers troubleshoot, but progress is slow." Alexander nodded, processing the information. "What model system? And have you been able to isolate whether it's a hardware or software issue?" The commander's eyebrows raised slightly, perhaps surprised by the technical nature of the question. "North Star Marine Systems, NS 7500. And we believe it's a software problem, possibly related to the recent update that was installed during our last port call." Alexander's mind clicked into analytical mode, the complex problem engaging the same skills he applied to technological challenges at Reed Enterprises. "I'm familiar with that platform. My company developed some of the underlying architecture for the command interface. Is your chief engineer available? I'd like to discuss some potential approaches with him." For the next 2 hours, Alexander worked alongside the ship's engineering team, reviewing diagnostic outputs and suggesting alternative troubleshooting methodologies. His presence seemed to energize the crew, who had been working through the night with limited progress. "Try isolating the quaternary navigation module from the main system," Alexander suggested, pointing to a complex diagram on the chief engineer's tablet. "If my suspicion is correct, the update created a conflict in how the system processes satellite data." The chief engineer, initially skeptical of civilian input, had quickly recognized Alexander's expertise and now implemented his suggestion without hesitation. After a tense few minutes, the diagnostic panel showed a series of green indicators. "It's working," the engineer confirmed, unable to keep the relief from his voice. "We've got primary navigation back online. Propulsion systems responding normally." Commander Davis clasped Alexander's shoulder in gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Reed. Without your assistance, we might have been limping to port for days." "Glad I could help," Alexander replied, already thinking of Sophia and the twins. "If you don't mind, I should check on my family." The word family emerged naturally, without calculation or hesitation. It felt right, accurate in a way that surprised and pleased him. When Alexander reached Sophia's suite, he found the twins awake and full of questions about the ship's technical difficulties, a phrase they repeated with the serious intonation of adults discussing a complex matter. "Is the ship going to sink?" Ethan asked, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and excitement. "Absolutely not," Alexander assured him firmly. "The captain and crew have everything under control. We had a small problem with the ship's navigation. Think of it like the GPS in a car getting confused, but it's been fixed now." "Did you help fix it?" Noah asked perceptively, noting Alexander's slightly rumpled appearance and the fact that he had clearly been up for some time. Alexander exchanged a glance with Sophia, who nodded slightly, encouraging honesty without alarm. "I did provide some suggestions," he acknowledged. "Before I started Reed Enterprises, I worked with systems similar to the ones used on this ship." "Papa helped save the ship," Ethan declared dramatically, throwing his arms around Alexander's waist in an impulsive hug. The physical contact caught Alexander by surprise, but he instinctively returned the embrace, one hand coming to rest gently on Ethan's head. The moment crystallized something within him, a protective instinct, a fierce desire to keep this child, his child, safe from harm. "The ship was never in danger," Alexander clarified, wanting to be truthful without diminishing the special moment. "But I was glad to help the crew solve the problem quickly." Noah, observing the exchange, approached more cautiously. "Are we still going to see the volcano island today?" he asked, referring to the planned excursion that had been the subject of much excitement the previous evening. "I believe so," Alexander replied, extending his arm in invitation. Noah stepped forward, allowing himself to be included in the embrace. "The captain will make an announcement once we're back on our regular schedule." Over the boys' heads, Alexander met Sophia's gaze. Her expression was soft, appreciative, perhaps a bit wistful. He recognized that she was witnessing a milestone, his first real moment of parental protectiveness, of physical comfort offered and accepted without awkwardness or hesitation. The ship's intercom system crackled to life, Captain Mercer's voice now considerably more relaxed as he announced that the technical issues had been resolved and normal activities would resume. Special thanks were extended to a passenger with technical expertise who provided valuable assistance to our engineering team, though Alexander was not mentioned by name. "That's you," Ethan said proudly, beaming up at Alexander. "Indeed it is," Sophia confirmed, her voice warm with a mixture of pride and something more complex. "Now, who's ready for breakfast? We have a volcanic island to explore today." The excursion to the volcanic island proved to be a highlight of the cruise for all of them. The twins, equipped with miniature explorer kits that Alexander had purchased from the ship's gift shop, approached the expedition with scientific seriousness, collecting rock samples and documenting observations in the small notebook Sophia had provided. "This one has bubbles in it," Ethan announced, carefully placing a piece of black volcanic rock into his collection bag. The guide said that means it cooled really fast when it touched the ocean. "And this one is sharp because it's newer," Noah added, pointing to another specimen with jagged edges. "The older rocks get smoother because of erosion." Alexander, walking beside Sophia as they followed the twins along the marked trail, found himself deeply impressed by the boys' knowledge and enthusiasm. "You've taught them well," he observed. "Most 5-year-olds I've encountered are not discussing geological processes with such accuracy." Sophia smiled, a hint of maternal pride warming her expression. They absorb everything. Sometimes it's exhausting trying to keep up with their questions, but their curiosity is something I've always tried to nurture, not contain. A wise approach, Alexander agreed. My parents took the opposite view. Questions were considered challenges to authority, not opportunities for learning. The admission was casual but revealing. A small window into the childhood that had shaped him, offered without calculation or agenda. Such personal disclosures had once been rare for Alexander, even during his relationship with Sophia. Now they seemed to emerge more naturally, part of a gradual lowering of the barriers he had maintained for so long. "Papa, look!" Noah called suddenly, pointing toward the horizon where a plume of steam was rising from the ocean. "The guide says that's where new land is being created right now. The lava is coming up from under the ocean and making rocks as we watch." "Amazing," Alexander acknowledged, genuinely impressed by the powerful natural process. "We're witnessing the birth of new Earth." "Just like how stars are born in nebulae," Noah added enthusiastically. "Creation is happening everywhere all the time." Alexander was struck by the profundity of the observation coming from a 5-year-old. This capacity to connect seemingly disparate natural phenomena into a cohesive understanding of constant creation. "That's a brilliant observation, Noah," he said, crouching to meet his son's eye level. "The universe is indeed constantly creating and recreating itself, from the cosmic scale of stars to the geological scale of islands." Noah beamed at the validation, his blue eyes, so like Alexander's own, bright with the pleasure of intellectual connection. The moment was interrupted by Ethan's excited shout from a few yards ahead. "Mama! Papa! I found a lizard! He's the exact color of the rocks!" As they moved to join Ethan in his discovery, Alexander felt Sophia's hand brush against his. A brief, perhaps unconscious contact that nonetheless sent a current of awareness through him. He glanced at her, catching a similar recognition in her expression before she looked away, focusing on Ethan's enthusiastic explanation of reptile camouflage. The day continued with a picnic lunch on a black sand beach, swimming in a protected cove where colorful fish darted among the coral formations, and a visit to a small local museum dedicated to the island's volcanic history. Throughout, Alexander found himself fully present in a way that was novel and deeply satisfying, engaged with his son's discoveries, attentive to Sophia's insights, connected to the moment rather than mentally reviewing business strategies or market projections. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the volcanic landscape, they made their way back to the tender boats that would return them to the ship. The twins, exhausted but happy, leaned against their parents, Ethan holding Sophia's hand while Noah walked beside Alexander. "Today was the best day ever," Ethan declared with the absolute certainty of childhood. "Better than the day we saw the dolphins?" Sophia asked, smiling at his enthusiasm. Ethan considered this seriously. "Tied for best," he decided diplomatically. "But today was special because we were all together." The simple statement carried a weight that Alexander felt acutely, the recognition that their family unit, however new and undefined its parameters, had formed a meaningful whole in his son's perception. "I agree," he said quietly. "Today was special." As they boarded the tender, the small boat rocking gently on the waves, Noah suddenly lost his balance. Alexander's reaction was instantaneous, his arm shooting out to steady his son before he could fall. The protective gesture was instinctive, requiring no thought or deliberation. "Thanks, Papa," Noah said, his hand remaining trustingly in Alexander's as they found their seats. "Always," Alexander replied, the promise encompassing far more than physical stability in a rocking boat. That evening, after the twins had been tucked into bed, their rock collections carefully arranged on the dresser for further examination in the morning, Alexander and Sophia sat in their customary places on the balcony. The night was exceptionally clear, the volcanic island still visible in the distance, its peak outlined against the star-filled sky. "You were different today," Sophia observed, her voice thoughtful rather than critical. More relaxed, more present. Alexander nodded, acknowledging the truth of her assessment. I felt different, less divided internally. The navigation system crisis seemed to shift something, Sophia suggested. Even before that, you were engaging fully with the boys, but after helping the crew this morning, you seemed more integrated somehow. Her perception was acute, as always. Alexander considered how to articulate the change she had identified. I think I needed to reconcile the two parts of myself, he said finally. The business strategist, the problem solver, that's been my identity for so long. Today, I was able to use those skills in service of protecting my family, not as a separate aspect of myself that competed with personal connections. As the cruise entered its final days, Alexander found himself increasingly preoccupied with what would happen when they docked. The thought of separating from Noah and Ethan, of returning to his solitary existence in San Francisco while they resumed their lives in New York, created a heaviness in his chest that no amount of strategic planning could alleviate. The twins, perceptive as always, seemed to sense the approaching transition. Their questions became more focused on Alexander's life away from the ship, on whether he would visit them, on how far away San Francisco was from New York. "Will you come to our birthday party?" Ethan asked during breakfast 3 days before the cruise was scheduled to end. "It's in 2 months. We're going to have a space and ocean theme because Noah likes rockets and I like marine biology." Alexander glanced at Sophia, seeking guidance. They had discussed various approaches to maintaining his relationship with the boys after the cruise, but had reached no definitive arrangement beyond a general agreement that he would be involved in their lives. "I would very much like to attend your birthday party," Alexander answered carefully. "If your mother agrees, of course." "Of course Papa can come to your birthday," Sophia said smoothly, though Alexander detected a hint of reservation in her eyes. "We'll work out the details later." "And can we visit your house sometimes?" Noah pursued, demonstrating the relentless focus that Alexander recognized as his own genetic contribution. "Do you have a swimming pool? Javier at school has a swimming pool at his house." "I do have a house with a swimming pool," Alexander confirmed. "And yes, I would love for you to visit. But that's something your mother and I need to discuss first." "Grown-up talk," Ethan said knowingly to his brother. "That means complicated stuff they don't want us to worry about." Sophia laughed, the tension in her expression easing slightly. "Very perceptive, Ethan. Now, who's ready for the treasure hunt activity this morning?" The diversion worked, redirecting the twins' attention to the day's planned adventures. But the questions lingered in Alexander's mind as they made their way to the ship's main lounge for the start of the treasure hunt. The activity, designed for the ship's youngest passengers, involved following clues throughout the vessel, each leading to a small prize and the next location. Alexander found himself genuinely enjoying the process, impressed by the boys' problem-solving approaches. Noah methodically analyzed each clue, considering multiple interpretations before determining the most likely location, while Ethan relied on intuitive leaps that were often surprisingly accurate. "They balance each other," Sophia observed quietly, as they watched the twins conferring over a particularly challenging riddle. Noah's thoroughness prevents Ethan from rushing ahead without consideration, and Ethan's intuition helps Noah avoid getting stuck in analysis paralysis. "A perfect partnership," Alexander agreed, recognizing the complementary dynamic, one that reminded him, unexpectedly, of his early collaborative relationship with Sophia. The treasure hunt culminated on the ship's top deck, where each child received a treasure chest containing chocolates, small toys, and a personalized certificate of achievement. The twins proudly displayed their treasures, Noah meticulously organizing his items while Ethan immediately began trading chocolates with another participant to secure his preferred flavors. As the event concluded and families began dispersing, Alexander's satellite phone vibrated in his pocket. He checked the display. James, his CFO, with a call flagged as urgent. Normally, he would have excused himself immediately to handle whatever corporate crisis had arisen. Instead, he silenced the device and returned it to his pocket. "Everything okay?" Sophia asked, noticing the gesture. "Just work," Alexander replied. "Nothing that can't wait until the boys are settled for quiet time." Sophia's expression registered surprise, then appreciation. It was a small moment, but a significant one, a tangible demonstration of his shifting priorities. After lunch, when the twins had retired to their room for rest and reading, Alexander returned the call, learning that a potential competitor was making an aggressive move to poach key personnel from Reed Enterprises' research division. The situation required intervention, but not immediate personal involvement. Alexander provided clear guidance to his leadership team, authorized appropriate countermeasures, and ended the call in under 20 minutes. As he set down his phone, Alexander realized that he felt none of the consuming anxiety that would typically accompany such a competitive threat. The potential loss of talent was concerning, certainly, but it existed in proper proportion to other aspects of his life, an important matter requiring attention, not the all-encompassing focus it once would have demanded. The clarity of this perspective was illuminating. Alexander had always believed that his success stemmed from his absolute commitment, his willingness to sacrifice personal considerations for professional achievement. Now, he was discovering that a more balanced approach did not diminish his effectiveness but might actually enhance it, allowing him to assess situations with greater equilibrium and respond with more measured judgment. That evening, Captain Mercer hosted a special dinner for a select group of passengers, including Alexander and Sophia as his personal guests, a gesture of appreciation for Alexander's assistance during the navigation crisis. The twins had been invited to a supervised children's party featuring a magician and movie screening, leaving the adults free to enjoy the formal occasion. Sophia wore a deep blue gown that Alexander had not seen before, her hair styled in an elegant updo that emphasized the graceful line of her neck. The sight of her, sophisticated and poised as she accepted a glass of champagne from a passing server, stirred memories of their earlier relationship, of gallery openings and charity galas they had attended together, of the quiet pride he had taken in her intelligence and beauty. "You look lovely," he said simply as they were seated at the captain's table. "Thank you," Sophia replied, a slight flush coloring her cheeks. "It's been a while since I've had occasion for formal wear. Most of my evenings involve helping with homework and negotiating bedtime extensions." "You've created a remarkable life for yourself and the boys," Alexander observed. "Your career is thriving. They're clearly thriving. You've managed it all beautifully." "It hasn't always been beautiful," Sophia admitted, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "There have been moments of doubt, of exhaustion, of wondering if I was doing enough on either front, as a mother or as an artist." The candid acknowledgement of vulnerability was something the Sophia of 6 years ago might have hesitated to share, protective of her independence and reluctant to reveal any uncertainty. This willingness to admit the challenges suggested a confidence that had deepened with maturity and experience. "Yet you persevered," Alexander noted. "That resilience, that determination. It's something I've always admired about you." The conversation shifted as Captain Mercer addressed the table, raising a toast to the pleasant remainder of their voyage. Throughout the dinner, Alexander was conscious of Sophia beside him, the faint scent of her perfume, the musical quality of her laughter, the perceptive comments she offered to the ongoing discussion. They had changed, both of them. The Sophia he had known 6 years ago had been brilliant and passionate, but still finding her voice in the art world, still defining her path. The woman beside him now possessed a quiet confidence, a groundedness that came from having built a life on her own terms, from having faced challenges and overcome them. And he had changed too, Alexander realized. The rigid, driven executive who had dismissed the possibility of family as an unwelcome distraction had been transformed, first by the shocking discovery of his son's existence, and then by the gradual, profound connection he had formed with them over these days at sea. After dinner, Alexander and Sophia strolled along the ship's promenade deck, the night air cool and refreshing after the formality of the captain's table. "The boys will be at the party for another hour," Sophia said, glancing at her watch. "Would you like to get a drink at the Odyssey Lounge?" The lounge was elegant but intimate, with live piano music and comfortable seating arranged to take advantage of the panoramic ocean views. They found a quiet corner, ordering cognac for Alexander and a glass of dessert wine for Sophia. "We need to discuss what happens next," Sophia said after they had settled, addressing directly the question that had hovered between them for days. "The boys are already attached to you, Alexander. They talk about you constantly, plan things they want to show you, ask questions about when they'll see you again." Alexander nodded, acknowledging both the reality and the responsibility it entailed. "I want to be part of their lives, a consistent, meaningful part, not an occasional visitor or a distant figure they see on holidays." "And practically, how would that work?" Sophia asked, her tone gentle but pressing for specifics. "Your life is in San Francisco, ours is in New York. Your work involves constant travel, unpredictable hours." "I've been thinking about that," Alexander replied, straightening slightly as he shifted into the problem-solving mode that came naturally to him. "I believe there are several viable approaches." He outlined the options he had been considering. Restructuring Reed Enterprises' leadership to allow him more flexibility, establishing a New York office that would enable him to spend significant time on the East Coast, using the company's resources to facilitate regular visits in either direction. "These aren't just theoretical solutions," he assured her. "I've already discussed some aspects with my leadership team. The company is stable enough, the management structure mature enough to accommodate a more balanced approach to my role." Sophia listened attentively, her expression thoughtful. "You've given this serious consideration," she acknowledged, "and I appreciate that. But Alexander, this would be a fundamental change to how you've lived and worked for decades. Are you certain you wouldn't come to resent the constraints, the compromises?" It was a fair question, one that Alexander had asked himself repeatedly over the past days. The answer, when it came, emerged with a certainty that surprised even him. 6 years ago I would have. 6 years ago I believed that success required singular focus, that relationships and family were distractions from achievement. But meeting Noah and Ethan, spending these days with them and with you, has shown me how limited that perspective was. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze direct and unwavering. "I don't want to return to a life where quarterly projections and market share are the only measures of meaning. I want to know my sons, to be present for their growth, to see the men they will become. Whatever adjustments that requires, I'm prepared to make them." Sophia studied him, perhaps searching for hesitation or reservation in his expression. "And if those adjustments don't work as planned? If the reality of co-parenting across a continent proves more challenging than anticipated? Then we'll adapt," Alexander replied simply. "We'll find another approach. I'm not proposing a rigid plan, but a commitment to making this work, to being flexible and creative in finding solutions." The simplicity of his answer seemed to resonate with Sophia. She nodded slowly, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "You really have changed," she observed. "The Alexander Reed I knew would have presented a detailed 5-year strategy with contingency plans and key performance indicators." Alexander laughed, recognizing the truth in her gentle teasing. "He would have, wouldn't he? Treating parenting like a corporate acquisition." "Complete with due diligence and risk assessment," Sophia agreed, her smile widening. The moment of shared humor eased the tension, creating space for the more difficult aspects of the conversation that followed. They discussed practical matters, child support and educational expenses, decision-making processes for important choices affecting the twins, how to integrate Alexander into their established routines without disruption. "I think we should take it gradually," Sophia suggested. "Regular video calls to start, then perhaps you could come to New York for a long weekend. The boys could show you their school, their favorite park, introduce you to their friends. I'd like that, Alexander agreed. And perhaps later, when they're comfortable with the arrangement, they could visit San Francisco, see where I live, where I work. They continued talking, moving from logistics to more personal considerations. How to explain Alexander's presence in their lives to the twins' school, to Sophia's family, to Alexander's professional circle. The complexity of the situation was undeniable, yet the shared commitment to navigating it thoughtfully provided a foundation that felt increasingly solid. As they finished their drinks, Sophia glanced again at her watch. We should head back. The children's party will be ending soon. They walked in companionable silence toward the ship's main atrium, where the children's activities were hosted. Just before they reached the entrance, Sophia paused, turning to face Alexander. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" Alexander asked, genuinely puzzled. "For proving me wrong," Sophia replied. "For showing that people can change, that priorities can shift, for wanting to be part of their lives even though it complicates everything." Before Alexander could respond, the doors to the children's center opened and a stream of excited, tired children emerged. Noah and Ethan spotted them immediately, rushing forward with enthusiastic accounts of the magician's most impressive tricks and detailed reviews of the movie's plot points. As they walked back to the suite, the twins between them, Alexander found himself reflecting on Sophia's words. He had spent his career proving people wrong, showing that a scholarship student from modest beginnings could build a technology empire, that conventional wisdom about market limitations could be defied, that seemingly insurmountable technical challenges could be overcome. But this, proving that he could evolve beyond the driven, work-obsessed executive to embrace fatherhood and its complexities, this might be his most meaningful achievement yet. 6 months later, Alexander stood in the doorway of his New York apartment, watching as Noah and Ethan engaged in an intense chess match. The boys had grown noticeably in the half-year since the cruise, their faces slightly less rounded, their vocabulary even more impressive. Noah's strategic approach to the game had evolved, incorporating lessons from the weekly online chess sessions he now shared with Alexander. Ethan, meanwhile, had developed his own unorthodox style, making moves that often confounded both his brother and their father. The apartment, a spacious penthouse overlooking Central Park, had been Alexander's first concrete step toward restructuring his life. Purchased within weeks of returning from the cruise, it provided a permanent base in New York, a physical manifestation of his commitment to being present in his sons' lives. "Checkmate in 3 moves," Noah announced confidently. Ethan studied the board, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Not if I do this," he countered, moving his knight in an unexpected direction. Noah's expression shifted from certainty to surprise, then thoughtful reassessment. "I didn't see that," he admitted. "Now I need a new strategy." Alexander smiled, recognizing in their exchange the healthy competitive dynamic that had characterized his own childhood games with his brother, though theirs had been played in far less opulent surroundings and with far less parental encouragement. The chessboard had been a gift from Alexander during his first official visit to New York after the cruise. He had arrived bearing carefully selected presents for both boys, the chess set for Noah, a professional-grade microscope for Ethan. The gifts reflected his growing understanding of their distinct interests and personalities, an understanding that had deepened through regular video calls and weekend visits. The initial adjustment period had not been without challenges. The twins, though generally accepting of Alexander's presence in their lives, occasionally tested boundaries or retreated into uncertainty. There had been moments of jealousy from Ethan when Noah's interests more closely aligned with Alexander's, instances of confusion from both boys about the exact nature of their parents' relationship, questions about why Alexander had been absent for so long that required careful, age-appropriate answers. Through it all, Sophia had been an anchor, patient, supportive, willing to accommodate the evolving family dynamic while maintaining necessary stability for the twins. Her generosity in facilitating Alexander's relationship with the boys, despite the complications it introduced to her carefully constructed life, humbled him daily. A key turned in the lock, and Sophia entered, carrying grocery bags. Alexander moved immediately to assist her, taking the heavier items and following her to the kitchen. "How was the meeting?" he asked as they unpacked the groceries together, falling into the domestic rhythm they had gradually established. "Productive," Sophia replied. "The foundation wants to expand the arts education program to more schools next year. They've asked me to develop the curriculum guidelines." "That's wonderful," Alexander said, genuinely pleased for her. Sophia's appointment as creative director for a major arts foundation had been a significant step in her career, providing both professional fulfillment and the flexibility required for parenting. "How was your call with Tokyo?" she asked, placing vegetables in the refrigerator with practiced efficiency. "Successful," Alexander confirmed. "The acquisition is proceeding as planned. James handled most of the negotiation. He's really grown into the COO role." The restructuring of Reed Enterprises had been Alexander's most significant professional adjustment. The appointment of James Chen, no relation to Sophia, as Chief Operating Officer had redistributed operational responsibilities, freeing Alexander to focus on strategic direction and major client relationships. The transition had been carefully managed, presented to the board and shareholders as a natural evolution that would strengthen the company's leadership depth. What Alexander had not explicitly stated, though many had surmised, was that the restructuring was primarily motivated by his desire to balance professional obligations with newfound personal priorities. He now spent 2 weeks of each month in New York, working remotely from the penthouse office while being present for school drop-offs, sports practices, and family dinners. The remaining time was divided between San Francisco headquarters and necessary international travel. The arrangement was not perfect. There were still missed events, schedule conflicts, moments when business emergencies intruded on family time. But the foundation was solid, built on clear commitments and open communication. "Papa, can you help me with my science project after dinner?" Ethan called from the living room. "I'm doing an experiment on how different types of light affect plant growth." "I'd be happy to," Alexander replied, a sense of contentment settling over him at the simple, ordinary request. These moments, helping with homework, discussing scientific concepts, introducing the boys to ideas and possibilities, had become the highlights of his days, more satisfying than closing deals or launching products. Dinner was a lively affair, with the twins excitedly discussing their day at school. Noah had been selected for the advanced mathematics program, while Ethan had been praised for his detailed drawings of cell structures in science class. Alexander listened attentively, asking questions that demonstrated genuine interest rather than perfunctory attention. After the meal, as promised, he helped Ethan set up his light experiment, explaining concepts of wavelength and photosynthesis in terms the 6-year-old could understand. Meanwhile, Sophia assisted Noah with his history assignment, occasionally exchanging glances with Alexander across the room, small moments of shared parenthood that had become increasingly natural. When the boys were finally in bed, Alexander and Sophia retreated to the balcony, a habit carried over from the cruise. The October air was crisp, requiring light jackets, but the view of Central Park illuminated by the city lights made the slight discomfort worthwhile. "I received an interesting offer today," Sophia said after they had settled into their chairs, glasses of wine in hand. "The Venice Biennale Committee has invited me to curate a special exhibition for next year's event." "Sophia, that's extraordinary," Alexander said, immediately recognizing the significance of the opportunity. The Venice Biennale was among the most prestigious art exhibitions in the world. A curatorial invitation represented international recognition of her critical perspective and influence. "You must be thrilled." "I am," she acknowledged, a mixture of excitement and hesitation in her voice. "But it would require significant time in Venice over the next 8 months. 3 extended trips of 2 weeks each, plus the month-long installation period before the opening." Alexander understood the unspoken concern immediately. In their carefully balanced co-parenting arrangement, such an absence would create logistical challenges, requiring adjustments to established routines. "You should accept," he said without hesitation. "We'll make it work with the boys. My schedule has flexibility now, and this is too important an opportunity to decline." Sophia smiled, relief evident in her expression. "I was hoping you'd say that. I've already been thinking about how we might coordinate. Perhaps you could base yourself in New York entirely during my longest absence, and we could consider bringing the boys to Venice for part of the summer installation. It might be an incredible educational experience for them." "I agree," Alexander said, already mentally rearranging his calendar to accommodate the proposed schedule. The exposure to international art and culture would be valuable for them both, and I suspect Ethan would be particularly fascinated by Venice's unique marine ecosystem. They spent the next hour discussing logistics, potential challenges, opportunities the situation presented. The conversation flowed easily, a partnership built on mutual respect and shared priorities regarding the twins' well-being. As the evening deepened, a comfortable silence settled between them. Alexander found himself reflecting on the journey of the past 6 months, the adjustments, both professional and personal, that had reshaped his life in ways he could never have anticipated before walking into the wrong suite on the Celestial Odyssey. "Do you ever regret it?" Sophia asked suddenly, as if reading the direction of his thoughts. "The changes you've made? The compromises to your previous life?" Alexander considered the question seriously, giving it the thoughtful consideration it deserved. "No," he said finally. "I've traded single-minded ambition for something more balanced, more complete. Reed Enterprises continues to thrive, in some ways better than before, with a leadership team that's been empowered to grow beyond dependence on my direct involvement. And in exchange, I've gained relationships that have dimension and meaning beyond anything I experienced previously." He looked at Sophia directly, allowing her to see the sincerity in his expression. "I don't regret a single adjustment I've made to be part of Noah and Ethan's lives. If anything, I regret the years I missed before finding them." Sophia nodded, accepting his answer. After a moment, she added, "And us? This arrangement we've created, co-parenting while maintaining separate lives beyond that shared responsibility. Do you find it sufficient?" The question hung between them, layered with unspoken possibilities. Alexander recognized its significance, the careful way Sophia had opened a door without directly stepping through it. Their relationship since the cruise had been focused primarily on effective co-parenting, developing consistent approaches to discipline, coordinating schedules, presenting a united front on important decisions regarding the twins. Beyond occasional dinners after the boys were asleep and necessary planning sessions, they had maintained a cordial but careful distance. Yet Alexander had been increasingly aware of other currents beneath that arrangement. Moments of connection that echoed their earlier relationship, conversations that extended beyond parenting concerns to shared interests and perspectives, a growing comfort in each other's presence that suggested the potential for more. "I find it evolving," he answered carefully. "As we've become more confident in our parenting partnership, I've found myself valuing our interactions beyond that context as well. The conversations we have, the perspectives you offer, the way you challenge my thinking. These were aspects of our relationship I always valued, even before the twins existed." Sophia's expression remained thoughtful, neither encouraging nor discouraging the direction of his response. "I've noticed that evolution as well," she acknowledged. "It's been unexpected. The question," Alexander continued, "is whether we want to allow that evolution to continue naturally, to see where it might lead, or whether we prefer to maintain clearer boundaries for the sake of simplicity and the twins' emotional security." "There's risk either way," Sophia observed. "If we explore the possibility of reconnecting romantically and it doesn't work, we risk complicating our co-parenting relationship. If we don't, we might be denying ourselves, and possibly the boys, the chance for a more integrated family unit. The analytical approach to emotional possibility was characteristic of them both, a tendency to examine complex situations from multiple angles, to consider potential outcomes and their implications. Perhaps, Alexander suggested, we could approach it with the same philosophy we've applied to the other aspects of our unusual situation, with careful communication, realistic expectations, and a commitment to the boys' well-being as our primary concern. Sophia smiled slightly. A strategic approach to potential romance? That sounds very much like you, Alexander. Some habits persist, he acknowledged with an answering smile. But the intention has evolved. I'm not suggesting a detailed 5-year plan with performance metrics, just awareness and intentionality as we navigate unfamiliar territory. Sophia's laughter was soft but genuine. Fair enough? She paused, then added more seriously, for what it's worth, I've appreciated the person you've become over these months, the father you've chosen to be, the partner you've been in raising the boys. It's made me reconsider certain assumptions I'd made about you, about us. As have I, Alexander replied. Seeing you as a mother, witnessing your patience and wisdom with Noah and Ethan, it's revealed dimensions of your character that I always sensed but never fully appreciated. The moment between them lengthened, weighted with history and possibility. Finally, Sophia set down her wine glass and stood. It's getting late, and tomorrow is a school day. We should probably continue this conversation another time. Alexander rose as well, recognizing the wisdom in not rushing a discussion with such significant implications. Agreed. Perhaps dinner, just the two of us, later this week? I believe Mrs. Abernathy mentioned she'd be happy to stay late with the boys if needed. I'd like that, Sophia said, her expression softening. Friday, perhaps? Friday would be perfect, Alexander confirmed. As they moved inside, preparing to part for the evening, Sophia to her bedroom in the penthouse, Alexander to the hotel suite he maintained for the weeks he spent in New York, he found himself reflecting on the extraordinary chain of events that had led to this moment. One wrong door on a luxury cruise liner had changed everything, had forced him to reconsider his definition of success, of purpose, of what constituted a meaningful life. The discovery of his sons had initiated the transformation, but the ongoing evolution was driven by choice. Daily decisions to prioritize relationship over achievement, presence over productivity, connection over control. Alexander Reed, who had once measured his life by market capitalization and innovative disruption, now found deeper satisfaction in a 6-year-old's mastery of a difficult chess move, in a thoughtful conversation with the mother of his children, in the messy, complex, rewarding reality of family life. It was not the life he had planned or pursued. It was, by any objective measure, more complicated, less efficiently organized, and significantly less focused on singular achievement than his previous existence. And yet, as he bid Sophia good night and prepared to leave the penthouse filled with evidence of his son's presence, homework spread across the dining table, small shoes by the door, drawings magnetized to the refrigerator, Alexander knew with absolute certainty that he had never been more content, more purposeful, or more genuinely successful than he was now, navigating this unexpected path with the family he had never sought but now could not imagine living without. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.